Take a plane, take a train, take a car, hitchhike if you have to get here, because what the late, great author William Murray would often call the quirky little oval by the sea, the house that Bing built where the turf meets the surf, my home track for the last 24 years. Del Mar is back once again to host its third Breeders' Cup. I can't tell you how excited I am about this, because Breeders' Cup is by far my favorite racing event of the year. 2 days chock full of classy horses, competitive racing, international fanfare, great wagering opportunities, and a lot of fun and frivolity thrown in for good measure. And we are kicking off the festivities right now on this Monday, right after the fields were just drawn for all of the races. Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Scatoni. Thanks for joining me on a special edition of Best Bet, the Breeders' Cup Draw Edition. And I can't think of a more perfect co-host than my guy here today. We both visited Del Mar for the first time together way back in the summer of 2000. I stayed, smart. He left, but I know a piece of him has always remained. Meanwhile, he's off creating the best racing content around the world with his In the Money media network. And I know for the last few weeks, he has been all Breeders' Cup all the time. So I can't wait to hear his thoughts now that the fields are set and we can really get down and dirty with the handicapping. Please welcome Mr. Peter Thomas Fornatale, PTF. What's good, my man?
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, Frank. What a pleasure it is to be here with you. I second your emotion very much about this being the racing event of the year in terms of the 2 days of championship racing. Really excited to talk about it with you. Really, things begin in earnest now. You know, you mentioned all the work I and many others have been doing on the Breeders' Cup. Well, that's all fine and good, but now we get serious because we actually have the composition of the fields, the post positions, and it's going to be very fun going over here with you now.
Yeah, I think it's perfect because I know you've done so much work when the pre-entries came out, so you know these horses pretty intimately. I know how Del Mar plays last couple of years. I got some interesting things that we're going to talk about. So it's kind of like, who put your chocolate in my peanut butter kind of thing. I think it's going to be perfect way to look at what just happened with the draw. But before we get into the nitty gritty and talk about specific horses, look, post position is important. We all know that, but you can't look at it in a vacuum. There are many differing factors that you have to consider. You have to consider jockey, you have to consider race shape, you have to consider run style, all that kind of stuff. So just from a general perspective, you know, as a handicapper, when you're looking at a race with a big full field, you know, how much weight do you give something like that? And what is your thought process when it comes to what we just saw with the post position?
I'm going to sound like a lawyer here, Frank, a lawyer or a professional gambler when I tell you it depends. It matters extremely, of course, in one sense, but you nailed it. It's all about looking at it holistically. The most important thing for me with post positions, very similar to jockeys, is how it helps me go through the process of what the professional bettors, Duke and Paul Matisse, call designing a race, trying to see how that's going to be run. These Breeders' Cup races are tough, man. You've got a lot of horses. If you go through here and make what another professional bettor, Mike Maloney, calls ability figures for each horse in each race, you're going to have plenty of races where you have multiple contenders in a 5-point window of the number you think they're going to run. Well, how do you separate them? How do you keep grinding and come up with the horse that you want to bet and the bets you want to make? It's by trying to envision how that race is run in your mind, see who might be advantaged or disadvantaged. And there's going to be times that we talk about during here where I'm going to call it neutral because a rail draw for a certain horse could be great, could be terrible. We're not going to know till the gates actually open and we see those first few jumps. So it matters, but it's not easy to precisely quantify how much that it matters. To bring back to the first statement, it kind of depends.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%, Pete. And that's why I said you can't look at it in a vacuum. But ultimately, at the end of the day, for me, it's all about price, right? To me, no one is unbettable because of their post or a potential bias. If they're value, they're not unbettable. right? The price, or you want to fade a horse because of post position, whatever. So to me, it all comes down to the price. A horse in a good post position who's 2-1, okay, that's fine. That same horse in the 14 hole going a mile on turf at 2-1 is not so good. But if that horse was 15-1, then all of a sudden, hey, okay, it becomes bettable. So you have to be very fluid. You have to evolve. You have to take what gives you. And I think it's so ultimately important. It doesn't matter so much at the Breeders' Cup because all of these jockeys here are world class. There were some jockeys in the Santa Anita colony that I just will not bet if they're drawn outside in a turf race, because I know that they're not going to give a best effort to save ground. That's just not how they ride. Very good dirt jockeys, but not necessarily turf jockeys. But here, these jockeys are world class. They know how to ride. And the other thing, classy horses overcome adversity, right? So, yeah, you might be burdened with a wide post, but if you're good enough and you're classy enough, might not really matter. So these are things that we're all going to talk about. We're also going to talk about some track profiles, some things about Del Mar that are quirky. Kevin Modesti, who's a journalist out here and writes for the Los Angeles Times or the Daily News, he interviewed Chad Brown, and Chad Brown had two major concerns. He was concerned about the quirky 1 3/8 distance for the filly and mare turf. And he didn't send a dirt runner out to Del Mar all summer. He said there was a main track speed bias. So that concerns him. So these are things that we're going to talk about as we go through. But for Chad Brown, one of the best trainers in the world, to be so cognizant of that and to have that in his mind as a concern, that's kind of important, right? So any surprises from what we just saw?
I mean, there's a few things, and maybe Chad Brown is a place to start. Already concerned about the possibility of this track playing to speed. How about the outside draw for his Chancer McPatrick, a horse that is going to need them to come back? Now, for me, I'm going to go ahead and pick the horse in the race, and I'm going to hope that, maybe there's concern about this outside draw and that it leads to a little bit more juice in his price. As you mentioned, if you're getting compensated in price with a theoretically bad draw, you can still absolutely play that horse. And we will have a day and a half of racing before we get to a race like the Breeders' Cup Juvenile to see if it's playing fair. But yeah, that's a very specific example where the draw vis-a-vis, it's less the draw really and more about the notion of the bias could come into play. I want to loop back to the bias, but while we're talking about, sort of surprises to come out of the draw, two other things popped to mind. One was a jockey musical chairs thing. I know that's, can be a dangerous game to play, but it seems very, very interesting that where the jockeys ended up in the sprint. I thought there was a real chance that that Flavien Prat would have stuck with Brad Cox's runner in there. The fact that he ended up on Mulligan, I thought that was a very interesting thing. When you had a couple of horses at the top of the market, theoretically he had the pick. I thought it was very interesting to see him go Mulligan there rather than the horse that had been the favorite in the international markets. And then not really a surprise, but like just super notable. Boy, the classic to me, rotten draw for City of Troy. Down inside in the 3, and what
kickback.
Exactly, a horse who's never faced kickback. He's gonna be facing it almost definitely for dead day. Now, again, getting back to the all depends thing, maybe they just try to send and make the running, and maybe he's that darn good, and maybe there's a 1 in 10 possibility it ends up being a good thing for him. But I think overwhelmingly it's going to end up being a bad thing. And you compare that to the draw for a runner like Fierceness. And then, then you have Forever Young drawing the inside, which, again, not where I would have picked for him.
Right.
Could end up being fine. Maybe that's the extra motivation to send just a little bit out of there. Maybe they end up getting mid-pack position, and that's really where he wants to be anyway. So it's like, I'm going to call Forever Young neutral, City of Troy bad, and Fierceness great, and that's definitely going to color how I bet the Classic. So those
all right. Well, we're going to talk more about each individual race, but I wanted to go back to what you said about how the track might be playing the main track. And look, I know some horse with speed biases. Biases don't exist. Blah blah blah. This and that. But I disagree. It's something I absolutely consider. Chad Brown was 100% right when he said that the main track in the summer favored speed. I went down, I did the notes. I went down the rabbit hole last night. You know, we both use Racing Flow. Several days throughout the meet were speed bias or no bias detected, but slightly favoring speed. There was not one day all summer where closers had a little bit of an advantage. And I knew that. I saw that with my own two eyes, right? We all knew that. Went back to 2023 to see, okay, well, maybe, recency bias, whatever. Many days in 2023 had closer-friendly biases, more than any speed biases that or no bias detected. And that was it. Last year I would handicap the sprint races from the outside in because the tracking wide trip was the winning trip. It's just the way it was. And last summer and this summer was completely different. So which track are we going to get? We don't know. And how much weight do you want to give it, right? Because like I said, classy horses can overcome that kind of adversity. It might not even matter. But the fact that Chad Brown is talking about it tells me that there's a concern there. And he's 100% right. There was a pronounced speed bias over the summer. We'll see what happens, but we'll loop around. We'll talk about individual races.
One more question for you on bias. So, you talk about speed versus closers. You tell me, but in my observation, in the last few years, when Del Mar had tilted towards speed, it seemed more outside path speed. Like so many American racetracks are maintained in such a way where you don't necessarily want to be on the rail. But I feel like still there were plenty of days in the last couple of years at Del Mar where you wanted to be forward and not on the rail. Yeah. And then this meet, it seemed like the rail was back in play to me. You 100%. Follow it a lot more closely than I do. Am I on to something with that, or am I out to lunch?
No, you're absolutely right. It reminded me of the days when we first started coming out to Del Mar, and I moved out here with Bill Murray. It was a conveyor belt, right? You hit the top of the lane and you were inside. If you were in front, you had a pretty good shot to just win the race. Nobody was passing anybody. This past summer reminded me a lot of that. I think towards the end of the meet, it started to play a little more fair. Who knows the rhyme or reasons? People will tell you about the tides, the marine layer, all this nonsense. I don't know why, but the stats back it up. And I also I use the racing flow, and I have a buddy who keeps meticulous stats about how the race shapes are at Del Mar. Horses, where they finish, when they're at the first call, the quarter mile, right? So 2023 on the dirt, you needed to be either sitting 2 lengths off the leader, and you could win tracking about 4, 5, 6 lengths off the leader. In front or on or near the lead was not necessarily good. It was completely flip-flop. This summer, if you were 6 lengths back at the quarter, you had no shot. I think there was one winner out of like 99 starts. So, we'll just have to see. I love what you said. We'll have a day and a half, right? We'll have all day Thursday, and we'll have the undercard on Friday to kind of figure things out. And, maybe we're overthinking it, but, as handicappers, we have to kind of do information triage, right? We get all this information, and then we need to figure out which is really important.
It's something you have to keep a little bit in mind. But believe me, it's very different racing when you've got full fields of grade 1 championship level horses than just an average race meets horses. And I'm a huge believer that pace and class can sometimes trump bias, but it's just something to have in the back of your mind. And it may matter, it may not. I'm not making any decisions based on any assumption of bias that are going to supersede the fundamentals of handicapping. I can tell you.
Right. Especially when we're dealing with horses like this, right? I mean, we got the best in the world here. We have 19 Japanese horses here. How incredible is that? I mean, I just love it. And the contingents were so fun at the draw. They were cheering, oohing and eyeing. Some were upset, some were happy. It was just phenomenal.
I've got my Japanese racehorse here, the great Sodashi, her idol plushie. That was a gift from my friend Klaus Ebner. We do a lot of work with the JRA. Last few years, I've been following these Japanese runners closely, and it's actually a good segue to one of the first notes I had, Frank, in the juvenile turf sprint was morning line maker Jeff Siegel. He's anticipating money coming for these Japanese runners with Akoro Sieg being put in there at 7-2. I thought that was just interesting to note. And that's another factor, I think, in terms of the markets that's going to be interesting. If the Japanese get off to a hot start and they've got live chances in the first 2 races, you might start seeing a lot of money pouring in for those as the 2-day meet goes on. Other notes I had from Juvenile Turf Sprint, just looked like a great draw for Asterius, who I saw as a major contender. I like being drawn down in the 2. And then I didn't mind the 10 for Governor Sam, just because he's got so much speed. I like an outside draw in a sprint for a horse with speed, because it just gives the rider some tactical options. Go to the front and seize control if they want to, or play the break a little bit if somebody wants to go on a mission, maybe try to stalk and pounce. So I didn't have anything major in this Juvenile Turf Sprint, but those were 3 quick little notes I had.
No, and that's great, Pete, that you mentioned that, because the 5 furlong turf sprint, that's been a bread and butter race for Del Mar for many years before any other track started running turf sprints, right? And the perception is you want to be inside speed, and that's always a good thing, right? But it's surprisingly, dug a little deep. The 5 furlong turf sprints play pretty fair. The same amount of winners come from the front, the stalk, and the track. You can't be too far back because you have to make up a lot of ground.
Sure.
But it actually plays pretty fair. And if you want to do some detailed post-position analysis, DMTC.com, the Del Mar website, actually has a really, really good database that goes back several years, where you can look at the winning post positions from all the different distances. So I would recommend checking that out. Here's the thing, though. To me, these races, the winner is the one who gets the cleanest trip, because 5 furlongs, it's impossible to overcome any little bit of trouble. So as a handicapper, I don't like that variable. I want horses to be able to overcome some trouble. And if they're good enough to win, they can. If you get out of the gate slow, you're done. If you get stuck behind a wall of horses, you're done. So it's all about getting out cleanly and positioning yourself based on what the pace is, and not running into any trouble. So that's just talking about track profiles based on what you said. Do you have a top pick in the race?
Oh, not yet. I mean, Asterius is interesting. I was a little surprised at how good the price was on Governor Sam between, in terms of the morning line prediction, between that and the draw. I was going to give him count. Looks like a really interesting battle between the Europeans and the Americans. I'll be grinding on it. I have notes. I just have to, I try not to overcommit before the draw, honestly, because you can't really fully do that race design. But in short order, I'm going to have full write-ups of every race over at atheraces.com, my big clients over there. And then also through our In the Money Plus service, we're going to have our In the Money team doing full write-ups. You'll have my grid picks for all the races. We've got other great info there too, including trip notes and figure equivalencies for all these foreign horses. Folks want to check that one out. That is a paid service, but it's inexpensive. And that's inthemoneypodcast.com/plus.
Yeah. And you also do a lot of official work with the Breeders' Cup, right? Creating content for them and whatnot.
Oh, yeah. JK and I are going to have more videos on their channel. We should actually take a minute, Frank, and remind people that, DMTC and Breeders' Cup, they're creating so much great content all the time. If somebody here is watching from the In the Money side or just watching on social, take the time, go over to YouTube and subscribe to the DMTC, the Del Mar Thoroughbred Club YouTube channel. And while you're at it, do the same with Breeders' Cup and In the Money Media as well.
All right. Well, look, it's 9:20 on the East Coast. I don't want to keep people up too late, but maybe we can take 10 minutes, go through each race, and give me your knee-jerk reactions. If you have any, if the draw was meaningless to you, then that's fine too. But why don't we do that? Because I know you know these horses so well. Go for it.
Juvenile fillies would be up next. And my only, I didn't have a post position note here, but I just had the note that I thought it was fascinating seeing Ryan Moore get the ride on American Bikini. This is another major Japanese contender. And I just thought it was interesting. We've seen Ryan Moore struggle at times riding on the dirt. If he could get some confidence early with a big run or even a win for American Bikini, just thought that might be very mentally helpful to him with the big mount in the middle of Saturday on City of Troy, especially now that job got more difficult with that inside draw.
Right. Okay. That's excellent. I love that. Let's move on to the Juvenile fillies turf.
One thing that surprised me was a horse that's, unless I somehow missed it, isn't in here. I was thinking Destino Doro was potentially an interesting long shot, but it does not seem like she made the final entries. All the draws that were going to be tricky ended up with like long shots that I didn't really have on my short list anyway, I wouldn't have picked the inside for heavy favorite Lake Victoria. You know, as noted, we do see a lot of Aidan O'Brien horses kind of fall out of the gate. That's not necessarily what you want from the inside. You have a chance to sometimes recover a little bit better if you're in the middle and that happens. But this filly is so classy. I mean, she's a champion. She's got the best form of any Euro to ever contest a juvenile race at the Breeders' Cup. I don't think it's going to bother her. If you could book that 8 to 5 on the morning line, if you could bank that price, you do it all day long and twice on Saturday, Frank. This one's 4 to 5 in here, and I think she could just roll.
The best horse in the race gets the shortest route to the finish line. Yeah. I mean, that seems simple to me, but I will tell you this: we were sitting next to the Connections of Thought process, and when they drew the 7-hole, they all cheered.
Yeah,
so they love where they're at, and they think they have a really good shot. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to that showdown.
It's going to be fun.
Be a very exciting race.
They could be good exacta partners too. That race could be as simple as those two.
All right. Well, next up, I have the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Any thoughts there, Pete?
Oh, well, this is a fascinating one because this is the example where, you know, certainly would not have chosen the rail for East Avenue, assuming that the rail is not a bad rail, you know, which I don't think it will be. But like, it's one of those things where, you know, I know you have a more negative view of it than I do.
I do.
You make your negative case first, and then I'll give you my counter. It'll work better that way. I'm not sure, Frank, if you froze and I should keep going or what. I'm tempted to just keep going until I have you back here, assuming I'm going out on the stream. But the way it could be is him down on the inside. He could get hooked up in a duel, especially with Baffert team tactics potentially in play. But the other way of looking at it is there's no messing around with East Avenue down there. They're going to go. They're going to be aggressive. And I think it's quite possible that that horse's weapon is his speed. And if his weapon is his speed, I don't mind him zipping from out there. I think Frank's view is much more along the lines that it's going to be a speed duel. And you know what? Even though I don't hate it for East Avenue because it'll keep him from messing around, it's really good news for Chancer McPatrick, I think, because when you tend to have speed drawn far inside, far outside, they just have to go that much faster. Hey, assuming it's a fair track, I think they can go a gallop. I think they can set it up for Chancer McPatrick, and that's who I'm going to pick in that race, Breeders' Cup Juvenile. I'm just going to filibuster, figuring Frank can get back online and get back in here. I don't want to just stall. I'm going to just keep going through the races here. And next up, we have the Juvenile Turf. I do really want to talk to Frank about how bad these outside draws are here. So we'll come back to this when we get him. It's so interesting that Ryan Moore has won all 6 of Aidan O'Brien's races here. Sometimes the secondary jockeys have done well in other races, but they not in this race. It seems like the one they pick is the right one. Henri Matisse is a fascinating horse because he on form looks great. You cherry pick his best figures. I mentioned the figure equivalencies that we have as part of In the Money Plus, inthemoneypodcast.com/plus. He runs his race, he'll win. But oh my goodness, did he act quirky, acted like a horse who just did not want to go by the last day. Hate the draw for him. I mean, just being on the far outside. I guess, on the other hand, we've seen this movie before. I think back to 2015 at Keeneland with Hit It a Bomb, drawn out in the 14 with Moore. And as a result, this horse that should have been 5-2 on form, not really on form, but on the speed figure he'd run at Dundalk. And instead, he was something crazy. Somebody look it up and tell me in the comments. But I think Hit It a Bomb ended up 5-6, maybe 7-1 as a result of people being so worried about the post. So if Henri Matisse is some crazy price now, maybe based on that big race, you still have to use him. Excellent. Are you back for good, or is this just going to be a little blip?
I don't know. The internet is being a little wonky here, but you know,
I picked up the ball and ran with it. Don't worry.
I knew. That's why I said co-host, because I knew that you just go right with it. I could have left the room and you still would have been talking. It wouldn't have mattered.
How bad are these outside draws in these juvenile turf races? How bad is the outside on your stats going a mile. I was just making the point that if a runner like Henri Matisse is a big enough pace, I don't mind. But it is interesting. There's horses that I made contenders outside in this race: Henri Matisse, New Century, Amori City. How big of a problem is it?
To me, Pete, actually, the mile turf races at Del Mar when the rails are down is more a matter of early position. It is extremely difficult to win a mile turf race when the rails are at 0 feet if you are on or near the lead. It favors off the pace horses. So if these horses can just kind of get over and save ground, it's not that much of a concern. If they need to use some speed to get out of the gate and they're going to get the 3 wide stalking trip, no shot. So to me, yeah, obviously you want to be drawn inside, but it's not an extreme hindrance. I mean, I've seen horses win from the 12 hole, but really, again, it's all about positioning and being able to just at least find some kind of ground saving trip.
Gotcha. That's very useful.
But I mean, will you be compensated in the price, right? That's what it's all about.
That's the other thing. I mean, Ryan Moore, we saw him do it with Hit It a Bomb at Keeneland. He might be able to do it. I have other questions about that Henri Matisse. I do have a big long shot that I like the draw for that I'll throw out there. Noble Confessor. When JK and I do our long shots video tomorrow, he might be one I put on there. I think you can argue that he ran better than Zulo Kingdom in that race with so many nice horses with tricky draws. I'm not saying Noble Confessor is as likely a winner as the likes of Al Qudra. Still haven't decided who I'm going to pick, but I'm definitely going to mention Noble Confessor as a live long shot in there.
All right. Excellent. Well, I'm glad I'm back. Now we can get back in the groove here. The next race, I have the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint.
Perfect draw for the favorite, Ways and Means.
Yeah.
Assuming the inside isn't a paved highway. Love that for a horse with that kind of tactical speed, be able to break, play the break a little bit. And I was also, my other note on her is the morning line. I hope Jeff Siegel is right with this 5-2 idea. I think she'll probably be a little shorter than that, but I'm just counting on her being a backable favorite, the kind you can really press up and build horizontals around. There's other ways you can go in this race, but I think she holds the card.
Yeah, and just to remind everybody who's watching, this is at 7 furlongs, this sprint race. So there's an extra furlong to get good tactical position, right, and judge the pace. So I typically like to see horses who can stalk or track and finish strongly in these 7 furlong races because they break out of the chute here at Del Mar. So you got the whole backside to get position.
Sounds like Ways and Means to me.
All right, excellent. Let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. Another 5 furlong, tricky race. Wow, what do you think here?
I could have listed this among the surprises because Bradsell getting the outside draw, terrible for him. He's never been around a bend. So, like, the idea if he could run inside, in and among horses, I'd like that so much better than being drawn out there in the far outside. Little spoiler alert for our figure equivalencies we're doing. This horse actually runs numbers as fast as Cogburn. I feel like he could have been a major player. I'm going to take less of a positive view of him from there. I think for Cogburn, the 9 is about where I would have chosen. And then just 2 other little notes. You were with me last year, Frank, and I needed big invasion. My heart, my lungs, my spleen, all the various organs. Just feels, I didn't like him at all. But seeing the Dettori booking, didn't like him at all this year. Seeing the Dettori booking makes me want to put him in somewhere at the C level because I don't want to deal with the stress, just sort of the insanity insurance. Maybe on the widest of spreads, Dettori on there makes me think about him. And I really like, another long shot, probably can't win, but I really like this draw for Believing. Getting Ryan Moore in the irons, adding blinkers. She's 3 for 3, left-handed. She's good around that bend. And that inside draw, they could just go crazy. I think she can come flying for 3rd or 4th. I'm going to keep her in the mix at what I'm guessing is going to be a very big number.
Yeah, not to add salt to the wound on Big Invasion, but this goes back to the point I was saying in these 5 furlong turf sprints. Clean trip. That horse had the worst trip imaginable and still only lost by a nose and galloped out the best. And it was frustrating. But, that's racing.
That's racing.
So, all right, let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Distaff.
I think you could probably start Torpedo Anna behind the gate, and she might be able to win here. But, yeah, I like the 2-4. They're not going to goof around from down there. Just take this race by the scruff of the neck. And for my exacta runner in here, I respect Awesome Result, and she'd certainly be in my reckoning of the race. But I do think that the one draw, assuming a decent rail, is interesting for Candide. I like the idea of her getting some position, mid-pack closing, maybe comes running and gets a second or third to Torpedo Anna, passing any horse foolish enough to try to run with that one early. But yeah, that's all I got on the Distaff.
So no concern at all that she may have had such a hard campaign and might not be at her very best.
It's possible. It's possible, but it's almost like if she doesn't win, I just don't know who I can make really a cogent case for. I guess Awesome Result would be the logical alternative, but she's going to catch all kinds of money. I think I'm just going to trust that Kenny McPeak is telling us it's straight. He's a straight shooter, and when he says she was undertrained for that last race, I think that that is probably right. Trish, who's a regular on our Horse Players Happy Hour broadcast, I'm sure you just heard me saying that about Candy. I really do like her underneath. I think she's got a chance to close and pass some tired ones. I don't think she'll trouble Torpedo Anna, but I do like her second, third, fourth, those kind of positions for her. And,
I love it. I love that people are chiming in with the comments. Let's keep going. Move on to the Breeders' Cup Turf. How do you see it, Pete?
This is another one where I just keep going back and forth. I haven't made my final answer yet.
Sure.
Reminder to plug that we are doing our final answer show. It's either going to be tomorrow night or Wednesday night. I still have to exactly figure that out, but it'll be on the In the Money YouTube channel for sure. Wingspan, I thought she was a little bit interesting. Interesting that they're here instead of the filly and mare, and kind of I don't know if it's ironic or what you want to say, but the 10 draw would have been a much bigger problem in the filly and mare turf with the short run, probably a lot more manageable here. I still think she's kind of an interesting long shot. Nice draw for Luxembourg, I wrote down, and this is a less than ideal draw for Rebels Romance, trying to become trying to win his title back essentially. But I was going to ask you, the long run down the back, maybe it's actually just going to affect the price in a positive way, and it doesn't really matter.
It's not as bad, obviously, if you start at the mile and 3/8. To me, I think horses who come from off the pace are perfectly fine with those outside posts because they can just come out of the gate at their own pace and move over and get position. The problem is for horses who need to be forwardly placed. So they have to use a lot of energy early to get to where they like to run. So again, you can't look at post positions in a vacuum. It's all about jockey intent, race shape, horses run style, that kind of thing. So, and again, classy horses overcome stuff. The 11 post at a mile and a half, not that much of a concern for me, for a horse who's shown so much quality throughout the career. So, it could just be simple. You just bet Appleby and O'Brien in the turf races, right? I mean, that's been the pattern for a while. But now that we have these Japanese runners coming in here, it just adds such an interesting element to every race. I love it.
You could tell a story about Shahryar. You could definitely tell a story about Shahryar in here. I don't think that's the way I'm going to go, but I wouldn't fight anybody who wanted to. He had a tricky trip last year. He's run some big numbers on our figure equivalents. Like Brandon's not nuts. It's not ultimately not what I'm going to do, but I mean, it's sensible.
Yeah, I love it. That's why I brought it up because Brandon made that comment. Japan and the turf. All right, let's go to the big one. I know it's in the middle of the card, but here we are.
I feel like I said what I have to say on it. Okay. Ideal draw for Fierceness makes me very comfortable picking him. I don't love outside for Sierra, but he does seem to have gotten a little bit better about the hanging left thing, and it probably doesn't matter. He'll probably just drop into the spot he wants to be in, and I hate it for City of Troy. I mean, I don't know how he could be in. Yeah. If God came down from heaven and said what price the horse should be, I don't know how he isn't 6-1.
I think you just have to take on this horse. You just absolutely have to take on the horse. I mean, what about the Japanese runners? Forever Young, Derma Sadagati, Ushba Tesoro.
I really, really like Forever Young. Yep. I think 5-1-ish. If he's around there, I could see him being all kinds of a partner and exotics key. I like Ushba Tesoro to come late to get a piece. I don't think Derma really. I just don't think he's in form. I'm skeptical about him, but Ushba and Forever Young are going to be all over my exotics. I just think Fierceness is going to get the right trip once again. And that's what he needs. I'd be nervous about him if he were down in the 3 and needed to break perfectly and have everything go right. I think John Velasquez is exactly where he wants to be. Going to basically use those 3-year-olds and Oshba, and then I have some clunk up long shots to run third, and I'm going to play exactas and tries and hope to hit this thing.
I have a question for you, and then Curtis Watson has a question. I would never say these 2 words in front of Matt Miller or Howard Kravitz, but Sierra Leone, any shot today to finally break through after we bet him so many times?
I love him to hit the board. I really do. They're going to go fast. I don't love the draw, but I mean, as a double figure type of a horse, I don't see how you don't use him, honestly. I mean, he's very fast. You look at that race that he ran in the Travers. He's had impressive. He's had his moments, and if he puts it all together and they go too fast, he can absolutely win the race. I think he's a lot more likely to run in underneath. Next isn't for me, Curtis.
Yeah, I agree.
Sean Borman made a compelling case on the show that we did on it. Subscribe to the In the Money Players podcast and you can hear it. I just think he's more of a specialist. I think he's going to have to go too fast early. It's going to take him out of his game. Sean thinks he has the stamina to get his usual trip and run on into the money, but I won't be part of my play in the try is playing against Next and City of Troy. That's basically the theory of the bet, is that, the other faster horses or other fastest horses are going to be able to get better trips and complete that exacta and try. And that's how I'm going to play the race. And if I'm right, I'm right. And if I'm wrong, there's another race right down the pike.
There's several races because the Classic is in the middle of the card. So right up here, the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, 1 3/8. So we start kind of on the bend on the backstretch. So it's essentially a 3-turn race. Not something we see very often, but the alternative would have been to run out of the chute. So another quirky configuration. Right. It's a lose-lose situation. You're going to get a quirky configuration no matter what distance you run at. What are you thinking?
I just thought this draw was terrific for the favorites, and it actually led me to think about maybe trying to get aggressive here and lock up some multi-race bets, playing the more fancied of the Appleby runners and playing Warlike Goddess, who I'd really, I'll admit, at first I wasn't sure, but the more I dig into her form and look back at her Breeders' Cups, I'm very, very good with her running another huge race. I think she could have won the Love's Only You year, moved wide on a day when it seemed to help to be inside on turf, and moved into that fast pace. Last time against Far Bridge, moved into that fast pace, plying her trade against males. It's not a strong group of first-time runners coming over from Europe. So yeah, I'm pretty interested in Cinderella's Dream and Warlike Goddess, and I think they both drew perfectly.
So here, because we talked about this quirky distance, a buddy of mine keeps pretty good statistics. Again, these are where the horses are at the quarter, the first quarter. There have only been 14 races run at this distance since 2019. So we do not have a large sample size. So I'll just give you a breakdown. 2 have won on or near the lead. 4 have won within 2 lengths of the lead. 3 have won 2.5 to 6 lengths back. But 5 have won over 6 lengths back. So it's interesting. Like I said, maybe the closers have an advantage because they could just angle over and not worry about that turn, while the horses who need to be positional have to run fast. The centrifugal motion maybe forces them to use more energy, and the closers just hug the rail and finish strong. But again, we're dealing with a 14 race sample size.
Fair. Just the fact that every running style is represented. I mean, my takeaway from that would be that it's fair. I mean, closers tend to even out once you get right around this 1 3/8, 1.5 miles distance. The automatic advantage of early speed in a full field race isn't the same. And you got to remember, in California, it can be tricky when you're talking about post positions. You got to consider how many horses are in the race too.
Of course, yes. Big full fields means different kinds of race shape. Let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Sprint.
Biggest note was that about Pratt ending up on Mulligan. I thought that was huge and might prove decisive to me in terms of how I play this race. The other thing I noticed is I think it's set up. It is set up for a bit of a boil over potentially, because you have a lot of speed drawn close together with Skelly, Mulligan, and Straight No Chaser all in a 4 post gap between 8 and 11. And then you've got Raging Torrent, another speed horse down at the rail who has to go. So for Mulligan, I think the best move, and Pratt's so good at this, break with them, but kind of let them go, flop outside, perfect stalk and pounce. I could see it. But who else is going to benefit from a really fast race shape? Nakatomi, I think, could get an absolutely perfect trip. But I want to look more and see, Nakatomi still has some positional speed. Mulligan has positional speed. Is there somebody here who can just really come from out of it? I know that's not typically what you want in a sprint at Del Mar, but I might want to have one ticket with some plotter to Marsh Lorraine style come flying here late,
Yeah, I mean, maybe for underneath. But yeah, if you're 6 lengths back or more at the first call, you're really up against it. But certainly usable in the exotics. And of course, if they go flying fast and the race falls apart, you never know what might happen. Let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Mile, the penultimate race in the sequence. What a cool race, huh?
Oh, it's terrific. A stronger group of Europeans than we were expecting, which is bad news for Carl Spackler and Johannes. And then worse news for Carl Spackler is this draw. I mean, this is for him. I think it's a problem. His poor runs have been when he was sort of 3 wide, no cover. I don't know. Maybe they dead send. Maybe they just dead send and try to wire him. But boy, it's hard to wire the Breeders' Cup Mile. So
it's hard to wire a mile on the turf with the rails down at Del Mar. It's a very, very difficult task.
So I think he's on the outside looking in, unfortunately. And I love the draws for Ramatuelle and Porta Fortuna. I think they've got some of the best form in the race. Notable speech. Also incredibly logical, but well found in the market, as the Brits say. I think there's better value with Ramatuelle and Porta Fortuna. I'll probably play those 3, potentially a lockup spot. Trisha asked in the comments about Soprano. I've loved her since Ascot. She was I had her in that big handicap. I think it was the Sandringham at Ascot, and loved her. I actually just expected more last time from her. I'm just not sure she's up to the level of these proper Group 1 fillies in Porta Fortuna and Ramatuelle. I'd love to see it. And I didn't have a whole lot on Beach Bomb. But again, I'll have write-ups, Trish, on every horse in every race over at theraces.com, as will the team on the In the Money Plus side. And for the shippers, we're going to have even more info with those figure equivalents as well. So check out theraces.com and inthemoneypodcast.com/plus, and you'll get a lot more than what I'm giving you here.
Yeah, Trish was referring to the Filly and Mare Turf, of course. So we just circled back to that. I think Pete gave very good thoughts on the Breeders' Cup Mile. Looks like it's going to be the Euros again. Well, not again. I mean, the American horses have beaten me a couple of times in this race. So, but I don't think what we're sending out is going to be good enough. I'm probably the biggest Johannes fan. I love that horse, but I am not taking 9-2 on that horse. I might even take 20-1. I don't think the horse is going to be able to beat those tough Europeans. If he does, good for him. Be nice for California racing.
Great result.
Yep. Let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, the last race of the day. I mean, drew a big full field, super competitive. What do you think?
So awful for Skippy Longstocking. They do the conservative thing and they come here instead of the classic, and then they get, they're starting into the dog beach basically. Not great.
Terrible post for that.
Bad luck there. Yep. Saudi Crown, I actually like the one, assuming a decent rail. I think he could really be controlling speed in the spot. Just looking at pace figures, I think he's faster than the other speedy types in here. And this is another one who, had a key role in last year's class of keeping Arabian Night honest, maybe helping set it up for the winner. This time, probably better spotted for a win and might just get it to close things out in the Dirt Mile. And I don't mind that rail draw for him.
We've seen some pretty impressive speed-based performances in this race, right? Didn't Golden Sense just run them all off their feet? Life is Good, I believe, at one point, right?
Yep. All the above.
Yeah.
I could see that being.
All right, well, that wraps it up, Pete. Well, here, just to talk to George, because this is interesting to me. He says Seize the Gray at 12-1. My thought on Seize the Gray is if he was doing great, how do you not run him in the Classic? To me, it's confounding to me, right? Well, I mean,
I couldn't see him getting a sniff in the Classic, and I could see him.
I agree, but
but I see him under the right
shot,
circumstances. If Saudi Crown weren't in the race, maybe.
Yeah.
I think they figured out that he needs to be sent. It's just when you look at pace figures, I just don't think he is fast enough to tangle. But I mean, sometimes it happens where the post gets to Skippy and Saudi Crown doesn't break, and there sees the gray out there on the lead by himself. It's still his best chance to win. But I can't go for him in this spot. I will be very happy for his hundreds of owners, many of whom are listeners and tell me about it every time I say something negative about Seize the Gray. I'll be very happy for them if I'm wrong. But, and I take your point about, maybe the Classic would be more of a spot of confidence. But you got to remember, these guys are running a business too.
They want to win a big race like this. I get it.
Winning any Breeders' Cup race is of outsized value to my racehorse.
Well, we were supposed to try to keep it lean and mean and go 20 minutes. But when we get together, Pete, there's no such thing. We're at 45 minutes. We're going to wrap it up. So people who want to watch the replay, you can watch it at 1.5 speed, and it'll be like 20 minutes. But Pete, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really upset that you're not here, but I know you're here in spirit. Been watching everything you've been doing with the Breeders' Cup. You're putting out so much great information. And I couldn't have done this show without you because your knowledge of all the contenders is just remarkable. I also want to thank everyone for watching and tuning in. Best Bet will continue on Sunday after the Breeders' Cup, back to our regularly scheduled programming. I know I'll be doing some stuff for In the Money Media. I'll be doing some write-ups for some of the Breeders' Cup Pick X sequences. And we'll also be doing some podcasts. So I'm really looking forward to a great week of excitement. I mean, this is what the sport is all about. And I just love that we're here at Del Mar and that the Breeders' Cup puts on a great show. And that we have it's a world championships. And I really feel in my heart of hearts that this year exemplifies that. So final words, Pete?
I would say listen at 2.0 speed, but with our New York accents and the speed at which we talk anyway, we both sound like Martin Scorsese in 1974.
I love it. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. And as I always like to say, good luck to us and let's make some money. Or as Pete would say, may you win all your photos. Or may your photos all be winning ones. All right. Good night, everybody.